Water. It's absolutely everywhere. It covers the majority of the surface of the earth. It's required for life. We depend on it. States fight over water rights. Boundaries in countries are contested over distances from the land for water. Have you ever thought about the water you put in your body? Well, today, what are you talking about?
A doctor and a musician start talking about frequency, tone, life, and the abundance of it all. And with an explosion of collective thought, the Chadcasters are born.
Good morning, Chad.
Good morning, Chad. How are you?
Excellent. Welcome to another Chadcasters. Today we have a special guest with us, Devlon Darda, who is the CEO of a company here in the United States, and we're going to be discussing something that's elementary to life. It's mandatory for life. It's the one thing you have to have within 3 days or you no longer exist, and that's water. So welcome, Devlon. Glad you're here.
Thank you so much. Glad to be here. Yes, water, and still a mystery.
It is.
Still a mystery. America's water expert, Gerald Pollack, has written a book named The Fourth Phase of Water. And he says that water is still a mystery. Despite all the technology we have, despite the ability to look at it under a microscope, they still do not understand how it works.
So one of the things you're taught in biology or chemistry is this amazing state or nature of water, how it has a high boiling point, a low freezing point, which makes it excellent for life because you need that huge range so that you can live and exist. It's only got two chemicals in it, or two molecules in it,
Right.
Hydrogen and oxygen. And the way they're conformed and the way that they're paired together and the way they work is unique.
Very unique. Very unique.
So what in the world got you interested in water?
Well, I think it started with my health journey, but interestingly enough, my mother's the one that brought all this stuff to my attention as a child. She was aware of the chlorinization and the fluoridization of water, so we were drinking as a child. I was drinking nothing but distilled water.
Gotcha.
Now I know that's probably not the best. It is not the best water to be drinking. But it was definitely better than tap water. So my mother essentially brought it to my attention that water, the stuff coming out of the tap, should not be consumed.
Okay. Now, how did your mom, do you know how your mom found out about that?
I don't know. My mom was ahead of her time, I think. She was aware of a lot of things, and she sort of got me started on a lot of different things. She supported my health journey. I got into juicing when I was 14. You remember Jay Kordich, the juice man?
Yeah, the juice man.
I was all about that guy. I love that guy. And I bought one of his juicers, and I juiced everything. Do not juice okra.
Sounds delicious.
Yeah.
Pro tip.
Yeah, pro tip. Do not juice okra. Yeah.
Okay. So when we talk about water, I'll tell you a funny little story of my life. So obviously my dad is a chiropractor. I may have mentioned that in previous episodes. And so I grew up with a little different perspective on what water is in life and health. And in 6th grade, we were tasked with this job of doing an informative speech. And I had met this lady at a gas station with my dad while we were waiting for somebody to put gas in our car, because back then, when I was in 6th grade, attendants would come up and put gas in your car for you. And she started talking about these alligators she had. And I grew up in the Kansas City, Missouri area. Who has alligators in Kansas City, Missouri? But apparently in her basement, she had this alligator refuge thing. And if she gave the alligators tap water, they turned anemic.
Interesting.
Isn't that crazy?
That ties into some other stuff. Okay.
Yeah.
All
And
right.
so she started talking about her alligators and tap water and fluoridization. And I was like, what? So I did my whole informative speech when I was in 6th grade on fluoride in water. Wow. So that was my jumping off point. So let's talk about the reason we put things like chlorine and fluoride in our municipal water supplies. Can you talk to a bit of that?
To poison the public.
Let's just go for it right now.
I mean, I could tiptoe around it and I can say, well, they put chlorine in the water to keep it clean. Supposedly they put fluoride in the water for our teeth, but the fluoride is definitely not needed.
Okay.
You could argue the chlorine, and it's not even really the chlorine that's the problem. It's the byproducts of what the chlorine kills that we have found are carcinogenic. Not necessarily the chlorine itself, but the byproducts of the things that the chlorine kills.
Okay, explain that a little bit more so that people listening can understand.
Well, when you introduce chlorine to pathogens, there's other things created, right? So the chlorine, enough chlorine will kill certain pathogens, and that process creates other inorganic compounds.
So the byproducts so when something gets killed or neutralized,
Correct.
then you have these byproducts that are still present. Those byproducts can be toxic.
Yes. Carcinogenic. Toxic for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's also, so that's chlorine. What about fluoride?
Yeah. Well, a lot of people don't know that fluoride was used in the camps in Nazi Germany to pacify people. It makes you essentially not care, apathetic.
Yeah, apathetic is a great way of saying it.
Right. Yeah.
So
how convenient.
And it is in other research I've done, and this has been many, many decades now, it is a byproduct of the fertilizer production process, and they need a way to get rid of it.
Correct. Yeah.
And so
another source of income.
Yeah. They are able to sell it to municipalities to put in the water because they say that it's a necessary component for strong bone, which is you need a trace amount of fluoride.
Correct.
But not too much.
And the proper kind of fluoride.
Yes.
You need it in a sulfate form, in a salt form.
Right.
Not in a metallic form.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
In the metallic form, it creates brittle bone.
Correct. Yeah.
And that's not what you want.
Right.
Yeah.
It's also linked to brain issues like Alzheimer's and dementia and things like that.
Yes. And the thing is with those metallic forms, once it gets into the tissue, it stays in the tissue.
The body has a really hard time figuring out what to do with it, how to deal with it.
So at what point did somebody decide that this would be a good way to poison everybody?
That's a great question. I mean, they've known about it for a long time. I believe they started introducing it into public water systems in the United States in the 60s.
Yeah, I think
maybe even earlier.
I think it was late in the 50s is when it started, and then it really ramped up 60s and 70s.
Right. They'll actually pay municipalities to use it a lot of times. But it is another. It's also a byproduct of the aluminum industry.
Yes.
Not just the fertilizer industry. But yeah, no one should be consuming tap water. No one.
So, water. It's everywhere. It's everything. We need it for life. I've been in Africa for many times, and you see people drinking water that I would never drink. Our bodies have actually a pretty robust way of handling natural pathogens,
especially if you're born around it.
Yes.
Yeah, your bio gets we are very robust beings, and our bodies do adapt. But it doesn't necessarily mean that that's good for us.
No,
because that load can create other issues.
absolutely it does.
So I grew up on a farm in Colby, Kansas.
Oh yeah,
And it's well water where we grew up.
Yeah.
And one of the things that they mentioned to us recently was because we're getting ready to have some things checked out. They said they need to test that for nitrates. What's that all about?
well, those nitrates that they're testing for probably are from agricultural processes
Gotcha.
that they're putting on
Fertilizers. and stuff.
fertilizers.
So it's just getting into
Or too much bacon on your soil.
Right, and now you would want to test for
the
the
problem.
They're making sure you have enough.
Oh, okay, all right.
And now, if you had a well, you would definitely want to test for fracking chemicals,
Okay,
which is a huge problem, right?
yeah.
And they're using all kinds of, the Roundup, the phthalates that they're
Phthalates and
using.
glycosides and
Everything that we use above ground eventually is going to get into the water table. It's a little bit harder for it to get into the aquifer. The aquifer is below the
So
water table.
Kind of break this down for people who this may be the first time that they're
Sure.
hearing this.
Sure. Well, there's the earth has a natural filtration system.
Yes.
So when it rains, it will go through the dirt, and then the sand, and then the clay. Wherever you're at, whatever that looks like, it's going to go through the rock, but it's a natural filtration system, and that water that's below aquifer is essentially under pressure, but it's extremely clean. It's extremely mineralized, and it's what you're going to find in springs, natural springs, not necessarily well water. Typically, what you find in well water is the water table, which is the water that settles before it can actually get through the rock layer usually. And that's different everywhere you go in the United States.
So the aquifer is a huge, it's massive. Like my in-laws are in Texas. The big thing everybody worries about there is the depth of the aquifer.
Right.
Because it's really dry out there in western Texas. Yep. And that's what all the municipalities tap into is that aquifer, which is way down deep.
Way down, yeah.
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 So in a well setting, you're going between like 75 and 350 feet, and you're just tapping into the water table.
Correct. Right, the water table, which, it could be very dangerous.
It can be.
Yeah, very dangerous. And even if your well water is clean, there's probably going to be some hard minerals in there that you don't want to drink long term. So.
Well, no pun. My parents, they're both in a nursing home with dementia and Alzheimer's right now.
Yeah.
Yeah,
if they grew up around a lot of agriculture, it's the phthalates and the Roundup, the fertilizer that they're using are so toxic. They're outlawed in most of the world.
Right.
Yeah. And I learned something. You'll get a kick out of this, Devlon. Chad's dad invented a farming tool called the organic weed puller, which is a mechanical way of removing weeds from farms.
Really?
Yeah. And Chad now runs, or you and your brother run that now, don't you?
We do.
Oh, how nice.
Yeah, it pulls, it's like soybeans, any low-lying crops.
Sure.
Where the weeds will get at least, 5 inches higher. The options prior to Roundup where you pulled them yourself.
Yes.
And that's what we did as kids. Then Dad invented this, and it took off like crazy in the 70s. And then Roundup came out with a thing called a wick. Put it out of business almost overnight. Wow. And then, but it came back about 15 years ago with organic farming. So,
yeah.
Pretty.
Well, speaking of your parents, we're actually working with a guy now that we've helped him reverse his Parkinson's disease.
Really?
Through nutrition. We have him